The United States, as so many others up here on this stage have cited, is facing a cultural crisis. There is growing, even violent division in communities across America. Increasingly, we don't just disagree. We distrust, dislike, even despise one another because we see the world differently. Our animosity for positions has become contempt for the people who hold them. Difference and disagreement are deeply personal, as on the one hand we rage against, but also recoil from, those we see as enemies across an increasing variety of divides: political, racial, religious, economic, educational, generational, you name it, so many more. Most of us, the research tells us, see fewer things that bind Americans today than we ever did in the past. We have few or no friends on the other side. We frequently find ourselves talking past those with whom we disagree, dismissing them as enemies with bad intentions, threats to be destroyed, as opposed to fellow Americans, human beings to be understood. We often make very little effort to understand the people outside of our increasingly narrow and varied camps. Ultimately, we're withdrawing from conversations. That's eroding relationships and understanding the very fabric of America. Now, 75% of Americans say this problem has reached a crisis level. And unfortunately, 56% say, hey, it's only going to get worse. Our condition is rapidly deteriorating into what experts have now taken to calling a soft civil war. Now, I want to check those data points in the room. Raise your hand if you agree that this problem we're talking about, as so many others have, has reached a crisis level. Who thinks it's only going to get worse? But who wants to personally do something about it? You're not alone. 75% of Americans say that they are willing to set a good example by practicing conversations across divides. And 36%, which a little back of the napkin math, 100 million people say they want to see a national campaign promoting such conversations. Powered by more than 100 organizations, so many in this room and have been on this stage, the new National Conversation Project is that movement. There is hope, even in today's hyperpolarized and tribal society, that we can turn the tide of rising rancor and deepening division simply by starting new conversations. Moving from this us versus them crowd so many of us are in to me and you. Indeed, we believe that each person who listens first to understand tips the scales toward a stronger and more equitable future for our nation, one that's built on relationships often created by conversation. Now, whether in personal relationships, in which we've all heard the quotes, being heard and understood is part of being loved, or on the front lines of activism, where so many of you heroes are, where conversations can galvanize support and increase understanding of any resistance that may be there, we believe listening first to understand has the power to make all of us stronger. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, in his book Righteous Mind, said anything we can do to cultivate more positive social connections will alter reasoning and behavior. He said if you have at least one friendly interaction, you'll find it far easier to listen to what they're saying and maybe even see a controversial issue in a new light. Finally, he said the main way we change our minds is by interacting with other people. I bet a ton of us in our organizations have stories of that very transformation. National leaders from both sides of the aisle also recognize the problem and solution. President George W. Bush in the last year decried, quote, discourse degraded by casual cruelty, observing that argument turns too easily to animosity, disagreement into dehumanization. In opening his foundation summit a few months back, President Barack Obama said, quote, why don't we practice what we preach and listen first? That's the theme of National Conversation Project. Listen first to understand. Building on the success of the first National Week of Conversation back in April with over 130 organizations and conversations taking place in 32 states, We've launched this National Conversation Project as an ongoing collaborative program to mend the frayed fabric of America by bridging divides one conversation at a time. We promote semi-annual National Weeks of Conversation, as we had last week. So many of you engaged, thank you, as well as monthly conversation opportunities around every first Friday. And we also gladly amplify conversations that you have going on any other time of the years. These conversations are both in-person and virtual on any topic of interest. And at nationalconversationproject.org, people of all stripes are invited to join or host a conversation. So much of what we talked about, and you'll hear about in a few minutes with the Bridge Alliance Member Summit yesterday, is this idea of collaboration, that we're stronger together than we are separately. National Conversation Project is explicitly designed to aggregate, align, and amplify the countless efforts to bridge divides already taking place coast to coast, to mainstream, beyond just this room, conversations in which we listen first to understand. We encourage schools, libraries, faith communities, nonprofits, and activist groups to host conversations important to them as part of a movement that is so much bigger than any one of us. I think we can agree America desperately needs to have a conversation, and it must include the full spectrum of our diversity, as has already been beautifully illustrated. This will not work if only a portion of Americans are part of the conversation. But organizations and individuals working together on this mission will reach that movement tipping point of 11 million people, 3.5%, and so many more. As civic leaders, you are uniquely positioned to lead the way. None of us, regardless of our perspectives and experiences and positions, wants to stay in this horrific state of so-called soft civil war. The United States, our individual communities, indeed our democracy cannot sustain this path. It's your democracy. It's our moment to lean in, finally achieving our nation's promise as indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, will require all of us. Let's revitalize America together. Thank you.